inspired by 16-year-old Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg, who began her weekly climate strike in front of the Swedish Parliament on August 20th of 2018. Since then, Greta sparked this movement called Fridays for Future, where school children are now striking all over the world every Friday demanding action on the climate crisis. But my story begins before my climate strike. I moved to New York City last August, and when I did, I pictured myself taking walks through Central Park, exploring museums, and experiencing a magical holiday season in the greatest city in the world. I didn't intend to become a climate activist. Then, last November, I visited family back in Northern California, where I was born and raised. During my trip, the Paradise Fire broke out and quickly became the worst wildfire in California history. 250 square miles burned, thousands of homes were destroyed, and many people died. To protect my health, my family sent me back to New York City early. And when I returned, I researched the effects of climate change, and I learned of Greta Thunberg. Last September, Greta began striking outside the Swedish Parliament. And on December 14th, which was the last day of COP24, I joined her and began my strike in front of the United Nations. I have been out there for 26 weeks now. After my strike, I learned of other activists around the world who were also on strike. And together we began planning for the first ever global climate strike, which occurred on March 15th. On that day, 1.6 million students protested climate inaction and demanded their world leaders act now on the climate crisis. Well, of course they didn't. So, on May 3rd, we did it again. And in New York City, 1,000 students had a sit-in on the Brooklyn Bridge, and 1,500 students held a die-in in Times Square. And finally, we're doing it again, and we're going really big this time. On May 24th, Greta, myself, and a group of leading youth activists from all over the world called for a general strike. That's adults and youth, on September 20th, which is the Friday before world leaders arrive in New York City for the United Nations Climate Summit. We're sending a message to the world that we won't stop until action has been taken to save our planet. The youth understand we need to mobilize in larger numbers than ever before in history, and that is exactly what we're planning to do. Sometimes it really upsets me that we have to organize and mobilize pretty much everyone on the planet just to pay attention to what's happening to the Earth and listen to scientists. But if that's what it takes, we're up for it. Here in the USA, we have one of the most difficult situations to be a climate advocate in. To make a difference here requires extraordinary effort. The forces that oppose us are huge. In our country, the fossil fuel industry is the largest funder of our political structures. And not only do they fund our politics, but they fund those who perpetrate climate change denial. So to counter these forces, I have some advice for young activists as we work to address the climate crisis. First, spread the word. Use your networks to not only talk about the climate crisis, but to promote activism and the protests. Publicity is our greatest challenge. On May 24th, 1.9 million students went on strike for the climate, which is even more than the first global climate strike on March 15th. And most major news networks didn't even cover it. Apparently, because we had been there, done that, on March 15th. The media didn't see any value in telling the world that our movement is getting bigger and we're doing it again. Demand answers from world leaders. Currently, we are being silenced by our leaders and even some of the organizations that support our leaders. Don't let this happen. Keep contacting them through every form possible, through phone calls, through letters, publicly on social media, and demand the media and press give the necessary coverage to the climate crisis. 3, don't back down from climate deniers. Call them out. Call out who they're being paid by, what their associations are. And when a climate denier says they're an expert in climate science, call them out on that too. We have to expose the climate denier community and who they really work for, because it's not us. Now 4, the next thing is numbers matter. It is not enough to like a protest picture on social media or show your support through words of encouragement and praise, though we do appreciate it. The way we will make a difference is by showing up with our physical selves. The reason why we've asked the adults to join us is because we need you. Humanity is not moving fast enough to address this climate crisis, and we are running out of time. 95% of the population has never gone to a protest or a march before. And for us to address this crisis effectively, that has to change. And now 5. Finally, activism is tiring. When I started my UN strike, I didn't realize how exhausting it was to give an entire day every week to the climate crisis. As my activism grew, I'm now giving most of my days to the climate crisis, like today. We have to make sure we can get enough rest and take care of ourselves. The first time we protest, it's fun and exciting. The second time, not so much. The third time is when we realize activism is work, and we now have a new, unpaid, full-time job. Even though it's work, the best part of activism is that it helps you feel better. I've met activists who said they were really depressed and hopeless before getting involved in climate advocacy, and now they're encouraged and have hope. Sometimes I lose hope too, and activism has made all the difference in my mental and emotional well-being. I stay optimistic by thinking about what the future will look like when we win. And we will. So let me share my vision for the future. I see a world where human beings live in harmony with the earth, respecting the boundaries of this planet that we call our home. I see a stable climate system where fossil fuels are kept in the ground and their emissions are zero. I see reforestation, ocean cleanup, habitat restoration, and ends to pollution, sustainable food systems, and renewable energy. And I know we can make this happen if we all work together. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I can tell all of you are just as proud of her as I am. So, good afternoon. My name is Kristen Hogue, and recently I walked for my master's degree in climate and society at Columbia University. This fall, I'll start my PhD in cultural studies, and I'll focus on the intersection of climate change and culture, reflecting on how our culture needs to change in order to effectively address the crisis that is before us today. But my academics aren't the basis for my talk today. What I'm really here about is what happened this past year with my 14-year-old daughter. As you may have heard, she's been on strike. When Alexandria first started her strike, neither one of us thought anything would come of it. We both laughed hysterically at the idea, and her to the point of tears. But it was apparent very quickly that she was resolute. And on her first day on strike in front of the UN, I watched her face down a security guard in order to be granted space for her one-woman protest on the unpermittable international property that is the United Nations headquarters. Even with all my academic training in climate science, policy, and adaptation, I didn't understand her point of view at that time, but I do now. Her perspective all starts with the management of grief. In our society, we have methods and structural support for loss. We work with the loss of loved ones, of pets, of situations and circumstances. However, we don't have a language to address the accelerating loss of our climate system and everything that goes with it. How do we grieve the loss of an entire species? How do we grieve the loss of an ecosystem or a biome? See, Alexandria cried when the Rio bluebird also called the Sphinx's macaw, went extinct. As a parent, my first instinct was to protect her from discomfort and emphasize the literal and the figurative distance from the loss itself. With the rapid advancement of the climate crisis, my approach to mitigating her grief, it wasn't appropriate. Our young people are angry. Their voices need to be heard, and it's our responsibility to create and support the space for them to do this. Now, the greatest ally the youth climate movement can have are adults. And the worst ally the youth climate movement can have are adults. I'm sure you're wondering what I mean by all of that. Obviously, the best way adults can help the youth is by being present at their events. I've not only attended all my daughter's strikes at the United Nations, but I've attended all of the large national and global strikes as well. As an adult in these spaces, I've had to do adultish type things. I've intervened with aggressive media. I've negotiated with the NYPD. And in my daughter's planning and organizing, I've connected her and other youth leaders in the movement with the adults that can provide them with publicity, capacity, technical support, and often advice about navigating social movements themselves. As a matter of fact, nearly every young person I've met at the strikes has an adult fully supporting their activism. The young people out there against their parents' wishes, well, they're not only relatively rare, but they're absolutely deserving of our extra support and encouragement. Woo! So the key to being an adult ally is to listen to what the young people are asking for and then simply provide them with the resources to meet their needs. Unfortunately, what often happens and is increasingly happening as this movement is growing is that adults are coming into the youth movement with their own agendas. And they're attempting to force the young people to adopt specific platforms and specific demands that aren't what this movement is about. Yep. These adults see the young people as, and the strike movement itself, as a vehicle to achieve their own personal goals and their own personal policy agenda goals also. And I'm also seeing adult organizations increasingly attempt to co-opt the young people. These adult organizations try to brand the youth protests while providing technology and infrastructure that only benefits them, and not the youth groups responsible for the grassroots planning and organizing. It's unfortunate that adults will try and capitalize off of what these young people have achieved in order to build their mailing lists and their donor bases. Our young people often see these overtures as offers of help, and it's up to us, their